to my favorite Beyonce songs on replay, and I just got swept up in it, especially the one called Bills, Bills, Bills. Oh, no, that's Destiny's Child. Sorry. I just make mistakes. But thank you for joining us tonight. If you are here early, which is still 7 minutes late, that's pretty good. Well done. We're going to be talking about financial independence, and you'll see why I was a little bit late in just a moment. It wasn't because I was listening to Beyonce, although I'm guilty as charged. I probably do listen to that from time to time. There's also a few other references in here tonight which might make you laugh. So hopefully we get those. Rob did ask why I'm wearing my best business shirt tonight, and I did make a joke that the higher ups told me I need to wear a shirt. So here we are. But it's actually candy canes and sloths. So I figure it's Christmas in July. The tax man is about to deliver a pocket full of cash to some investors. So why not, huh? Get in the festive spirit. And Annika, you have got it in one. Rob did say that I did look young when I wear this shirt and when I shave. So, yeah, I don't know. So anyway, I wanted to start tonight a little bit differently. Many of you will know that we start the Selfwealth Live program with a bit of a joke, and I did see a joke already appearing. Is the tardiness Owen's joke for this evening? Says pocket full of shell. Shell, not quite, but I am taking jokes. Give me retirement right now, says Green Sharky. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to give you something else. I'm going to give you a bit of a challenge, if you will. And what I would love for you to do, even if you have never thought about this, and I'm putting you on the spot and you're like, damn, I want to need some more time to think about this. I would love for you to think through a few things for me. This is an activity we've done once before publicly at Rask, and we've done it many times before in like workshops and these types of things. But can you describe your ideal Tuesday? And what I mean by this is, can you for a moment just imagine that you are waking up on your very best Tuesday? So maybe this is the working day. It's an ideal Tuesday. Maybe you're not financially independent right now, but what are you actually doing on that Tuesday? And start in the morning and think through your day. For me, I've done this before and I've done it publicly, and most of the Rask team have. And my day starts basically, I would be working because I love what I do. So that's just the general theme. So I'd be getting up early and probably going for a run, or if I can, doing a bit of a workout. These days, my workout is a lot shorter than it used to be. But I would probably be doing a workout. I'd love to flick on Bloomberg or the morning business news because I get a lot from that. Make myself a coffee, or even go down to the local cafe before, like right when they open, and then come back and work from home. I love working from home because it allows me to be around my animals and be around the family and those types of things. At the end of the day, make dinner, take care of the family, and then probably settle in for some Netflix, which will get brought up on this. So I'd love to, I don't read as much as I used to, but maybe just watch a Netflix show and watch a bit of maybe a crime documentary. I'm a bit of a sucker for one of those. Yes, I'm the one that's adding to that. But I would love to know what are the things that would be in your week or your day. Sorry, your day. What would be in your day? And the reason I want you to think about this is that when I do this exercise with people, what I find is that most people, the overwhelming majority of people who do this exercise and they write down a couple of sentences, what they actually do is they actually find out that they're not far away from this ideal day. They actually aren't far away at all. They're so close and they don't even realize. But they think, I'm so far away from the life that I want to live. But then they actually realize, no, actually, I'm very, very, very close to it already. So have a think about this. Which morning business news do you recommend? I listen to Bloomberg, and you don't have to pay for it. It's not the expensive version of Bloomberg. You can get Bloomberg on YouTube. It's called Bloomberg Asia TV Live or Bloomberg TV Live. It's 24/7, and you can get it on your smart TV. If you have like a Samsung or something, you just look in the apps. It's in there too. But it's also on YouTube, which is where I watch it. So I sometimes have it playing in the background. It's, in my opinion, the world's best financial news. So Genevieve, you just said something. You said it's very interesting. I have found the same thing, that it's very close to ideal. A lot of people's days, when they go through this exercise, they find out that their life is very close to what they actually want it to be. And it's not because we all suck and we're not creative. It's actually just because we genuinely are closer to that than you think about. Genevieve said, if you asked me about my ideal Wednesday, it would include this session. Well, Genevieve, isn't that very lovely of you to say? Thank you so much. You know how to bring a smile to this sloth on a candy cane eyes. Anyway, being rich. I believe being rich is not a number. I believe it's a state of mind. So I know I'm getting into philosophical, but we'll get into stocks and ETFs and that just in a minute. But I actually believe once you realize that what you want and what you have in front of you is probably close to perfect, you begin to realize that you don't need to strive harder and harder and harder and harder for something that may not exist. So I speak, and many of you know this, I'm very, very humbled that I get to speak to billionaires, like literally billionaires. And I get to speak to some of the richest people on earth, right? And what I found is they're no happier than anyone else that I deal with. And it's not just a cliche, they actually aren't. And what I've found is that the wealth that you amass and you accumulate doesn't actually correspond to happiness. And almost all of the studies show this. So it actually shows that past $150,000, the benefits of more money actually start to decline rapidly. So there is a lot of science behind this kind of philosophical thing as well. Without further ado, here is this week's joke. And if you haven't already seen the Barbie movie, I can highly recommend it. I went 2 nights ago, and I'm still listening to the album. I thought it was great. And there's the Oppenheimer screenshot on the other side. And this is a meme that's going around, is on the other side. And what it represents, and there's a lot of this going around in investing circles right now, is a lot of people think, I'm an investor. Woohoo! Look how great this is. It's all in this fake world almost. And then their stocks fall 20%. And they actually find out what investing really is. And this is my kind of cliche moment for this week. So Roger, you said, for me, rich is a combination of income, expenditure, lifestyle expectations, and lifestyle reality. I've never heard that, Roger. That's great. Okay, so the part that I would like to direct your attention to, what's that finger pointing towards? Oh, yes, a big orange thing that says subscribe. Oh, okay, I'll just leave that with you for a moment. That's from the team at Selfwealth, by the way, I might add. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay, back on. So this week's disclaimer, the part that Rob and I always we just have like at Rob's place the other day, he brought me around and I took around my hammer and drill, and he said, we've got to put up this mural for all the best Selfwealth Live disclaimers that you've ever seen on the wall. Kind of like a vision board for disclaimers. I know, it's a thing. Selfwealth Live is a video series or a stream that goes live every Wednesday night, and it contains general financial advice only. It means that the information has not taken into account your needs, goals, or objectives. So please do not act on the information that you hear tonight or you see until you have spoken to a licensed and trusted financial planner. My name is Owen. I'm the founder and director of the Rask Group, which has a company number as ACN. You can see that there. Corporate authorized representative number 1280930 of Wattle Partners, AFSL 383169. Wow, I should call the horse racing. No, not really. I don't really like that. But please refer to the Rask Group's Financial Services Guide. That's an FSG. It's on our website. It tells you everything you need to know about what we can and can't say. The views expressed in the live streams are solely those of myself and or our guests, or even everyone else in the chat, and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Selfwealth. Whew, I did that with, and actually I did breathe during that, believe it or not. I'm acting on Bloomberg, says Chop. Well, that's a good one. Yes, that is not financial advice. You can listen to Bloomberg. Go for it. Jenny, you said, get up, drive to the pool, do intensive aqua lessons by 2, drive home, clean up, check Selfwealth, cook dinner, watch movie with husband, go to bed. Love it. Simple. Love it. Love it. Love it. Mick, you've said, get up, have a coffee, cook brekkie for the fam. Then you've got to take the kids to school, go for a ride on the mountain bike. Love it. Absolutely love it. So it's great. Sparky, you've said, is this FIRO, FIRO, financial independent retire optional for 30s or 40s, or you need to be in your 60s to retire, like the Aussie Firebug is Firo. We'll talk about that, actually. I can't wait to see the disclaimer live in Townsville, says Caroline. Oh, Caroline, you really made my day. Yes, there will be a disclaimer at the Townsville event. Okay, so how much do I need to retire? Last week in the passive income video series, we were actually live on the passive income topic last week. How old will you be when you retire? Rob is saying in the with the votes. Assuming investments don't all go to the moon, how old will you be? I'll say I'll be in my 40s. Most people say 60s, followed by 50s. Great, great, great. Okay, last week on Selfwealth Live, we talked about passive income. Easily the fastest to 10,000 viewed of any Selfwealth Live we've ever done was last week. So if you haven't already checked that out, it was as the kids say, a banger. It was a really good hit. It's probably even more popular than Barbie. I think Margot Robbie's going to write into us and ask if she can come on the next Selfwealth Live. At which point I'll say, absolutely, you can. Give us your best financial advice. So the episode last week talked about how to build passive income from the stock market. And you don't need a lot of money to do that. You can start with $500. You can start with 500,000 or 5 million. Doesn't really matter. You can start today to earn like that magical income that hits your bank account whenever a company pays a dividend or whenever an ETF pays a distribution. So this time around, we're going to talk about how much you actually need to retire and whether you can actually do it early. And there are heaps of resources online, and we don't have an infinite amount of time. So I'm going to keep it kind of high level, and then we can talk about ETFs, we can talk about stocks, calculators, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so this is the chart, the table, that I shared last week, and it shows you roughly what a couple needs or a single needs for a comfortable lifestyle or a modest lifestyle. But what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means a lot of chill because you'll be retired, but probably only one Netflix account. Because if I zoom in here, get that out of the way, if I zoom in, you can actually see what would be spent each week on certain items. So this is for retirees aged 65 to 84. You can see with a comfortable lifestyle, it looks like per week they're spending $61 on electricity and gas. It looks like they're spending a fair bit on the barber and hairdresser each week, $26. Jeez, I didn't know the hairdressers and the barbers of the world consume so much of our money. That's okay. And you can see some of the other things that you'd spend some money on. And you look at this stuff, and frankly, I get a little bit concerned. Like, I get a little bit scared by this. I see this and I'm like, wow, what happens if I spend $33 on my barber? Probably by then I'll have no hair. So that's a competitive advantage for me. But you'll probably look at this and you probably think, well, they're only spending $9.29 a week on media. That doesn't sound like the lifestyle I want or have right now. And it's pretty scary. I'm not going to lie. So how do we start to position ourselves now to put ourselves on the best footing so that even if we retire early, which puts up those rates, by the way, because you'll need more in retirement, even if we retire early, how can we put ourselves on the best footing? And I'm going to talk to you, and I think it was Sparky or someone else who said it earlier on. I can't see it, just quickly flicking back in my chat. But someone did say something along the lines of your own job and these types of things and having your own business. So I have not gone to the hairdresser since 1986, Genevieve. Wow, what do you do? Just shave it all off, or I'm asking for a friend. So we've got, do you have a link for this spreadsheet, says Paul. Yes, I do have a link. I can drop that in So as for this one, so I'll put this link in the live chat here. So if you're watching it after the fact, you will be able to see that in the live chat down the side. Okay, so there's that, the retirement standard. So this is from ASFA, which is, they publish it every 3 months. They update it. So, okay, so Robert Kiyosaki, many of you will know him as the guy that wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he came up with this thing called the cash flow quadrant. Some of you will remember this from the book if you've read it, and many of you will be familiar with the concepts. If you are familiar with the concepts or you have read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, let me know what you think. It's a really highly recommended book. Like, it is one of the highest or most commonly recommended finance books. And I can see why, although after the fact, after he wrote this book many years later, he seems to have gone in a completely different direction, which I'll leave it up for you to determine if that direction seems logical. Now, uh, oh, ironically, you say I often get comments about how lovely my hair is, Genevieve. Well, that's very nice. Okay, so what is the cash flow quadrant? Let's bring up my Mr. Squiggle here. And the cash flow quadrant is actually a pretty easy thing to remember once you've seen it once. So in the top corner, we have an E. In this quarter, we have a B. In this one, we have an S. And in this one, we have an I. I just didn't want to bugger that up. So what this actually shows you are the different sources of, I guess, your income and your wealth. Now, a lot of people as employees who work for a company, you are an employee, so you have a job, you earn a salary, right? Employee slash job, right? So that's you there. In this one, we have the business. So this is someone who owns their own business, like a private company, like a bakery or electrician or something like that. Down here, we have self-employed. And I'll get to what all of these mean in just a minute. So self-employed person might be like a consultant, an architect who works, here and there, but not all the time. And finally, we have an investor. Let's get rid of this guy because he's freaking me out a bit. So here we have kind of the cash flow quadrants. Now, of all of these quadrants, it's really important to understand that not all of them are created equal. Some of them, for example, allow humongous amounts of wealth, but some of them will cap your earnings and you will be basically, stuck at that level or around about that level for forever. So many of you will know that all of us here, basically in the live chat, we are all investors. Investors are the best types of people to create wealth because you don't have to run the business. You don't need to do any type of employment at all. And you will make money when you sleep. You will literally make money when you sleep. How do I know that? Because it's happened to me and we talked about it last week. If you own shares, for example, if you own US shares like Alphabet, which is Google last night came out with its financial report and it beat all of expectations. Now, some companies pay dividends in the United States and some companies pay dividends in Australia. So you could literally wake up the next morning and you would find that, oh, I'm going to get a dividend. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. And so we talked about that last week about passive income. It's income that you receive when you're not doing anything. And investors get to do that. They get maximum reward with the minimum effort. Now, business owners also get that huge reward, but what they also get is a lot of effort. So they've got to work really hard for that. I don't care what anyone says. Like nowadays I'm a business coach as well as an investor, and I speak with a lot of small business owners, and they tell me how hard their business is. Some are profitable, some aren't. Many business owners that I speak to, in fact, most of them that I speak to, take less than $1,000 of wage. They might have a really successful business and work out of that. That's why they come to me. But for the most part, this is hard. You see the Elon Musks of the world, Elon Musk's net worth, and you see something like this and you're like, wow, I need to start a business. And that's true, you do, but that's really hard. So I would say this is the number one way to get seriously rich, but most of us males will lose our hair in the process. Sorry, guys. And ladies, I don't know what the equivalent is, but it ain't pretty, right? So this is another really good way to grow wealthy, but it takes a lot of stress and a lot away from the other parts of your life. Over on the left-hand side, we have self-employed. Self-employed is still better in some instances than being an employee because you can set your own income level and you can manage your own taxes. You can work when you want, and typically you can charge a bit more. So typically a self-employed person, like say a self-employed person that makes $100,000, it might be equivalent to an employee that makes 70 after all the things like the taxes and that are considered, but at least it gives them control and they can work more if they want to. And finally, we have employees who may stick at a job and earn a good salary, but their upside is limited unless they move into one of these other categories. So, what does this have to do with early retirement? A lot of people spend their time in this box and this box alone thinking that they will achieve early retirement. And of all the people that I've come across that achieve early retirement, none of them stay in this box. None of them. They all look at other ways to either increase their income. In fact, all of them have done that I know. Buy or start a business. And all of them, otherwise known as 100% of them, are investors. They either invest in property, they invest in other businesses, they invest in shares, they invest in ETFs, they invest in index funds, whatever. Some of them invest in websites. Some of them invest in cars. Some of them invest in insert other things. But all of them, everyone that I know who has retired early, spends a lot of their time in this quadrant down here. They might start here and then leverage other things, like they have their side hustles and these types of things. Sparky, you've said a few of the stories I have listened to, they used property to get a start and afterwards put it all in the money into the stock market and achieve FIRO, the optional retirement. So I just want to maybe clear up something that for people that haven't come across this, and Spark is using the term. So the idea is FIRE equals financial independence, retire early. I'm going to show you the biggest advocates for this in Australia in just a minute. But what Sparky's saying is this, saying retire optional, right? So a lot of people in the media in particular, typically there's certain types of media outlets that have a problem with people saving money. They say that this one's about just people eating lentils and lettuce leaves and not contributing to society. And then this one, which is exactly the same thing, is actually what the reality is. It's important to remember that the retirement early is the part that people take offense to. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But back to this. If you are just in this category and you plan to retire early, you have to do something else. You absolutely do something else. Now, I'm not saying you have to quit your job. That would probably be the last thing, because I think being an employee is a wonderful thing. It's absolutely beautiful. But if you're not tracking towards the retirement that you want, you have to step outside this. And that might include an early retirement, because the only savings that you get if you're in here are typically like your home, if you buy a home, or your super. But you can't access super until, guess what? You reach retirement age. So it's not retire early in that instance. It's just retire on normal time. So take your time here and actually consider which of these things you can actually do. So Charlie Munger, the sidekick of Warren Buffett, the billionaire himself, says, and he's made this remark quite a few times, that the first $1 million is the hardest, but it also goes to say that the first $100,000 is the hardest. And I find a lot of people who are on this journey of trying to retire early typically set like a milestone of like $100,000 is like where I need to be. And the easiest way to get to $100,000, the easiest way for most of us anyway to get to $100,000 is actually, where's a different colored green? We'll go red again, is actually these things. They are the easiest way to get to $100,000. Side hustle, working at a shift at Bunnings on the weekend, as well as your 9 to 5, teaching piano lessons, doing whatever you want to do on the side, and getting a pay rise or switching jobs. Those are the easiest ways. But those alone are not enough to achieve financial independence. Ben, you said business versus self-employed. What's the difference? You mean investing in businesses versus owner-operator? Exactly, Ben. So this one right here, Ben, is where you own the business outright. So you own the business, you run the business, etc. This one here is where you invest in the stock market or other people's businesses. And this one here is like if it's just you, like say you're a consultant and you have like, I don't know, you charge $400 an hour and you're an architect or something like this, right? So moving on. So this is not enough to increase your wage and get a bigger shovel. So there was a comment about Mick Nick Energy. You said Glenn James special. This is a Glenn James special. Glenn James being the founder of My Millennial Money talks about having a bigger shovel. If you want to get to $100,000, the best way to get there is to get a bigger shovel, to start shoveling more money into your investment portfolio. But there's also another piece of advice that often goes overlooked. And no, this is not advice from Morgan Freeman. It's advice from Morgan Housel. See what I did there? A little bit of a joke. This is advice from Morgan Housel, the author of The Psychology of Money. Is a great one. So he says that independence, and he's talking about financial independence here, at any income level is driven by your savings rate. So the savings rate, if you don't know what the savings rate is, it's your income. So income minus your expenses. A lot of people don't do this pretty simple calculation in their bank account. That basically equals what you have left over. And a person close to me once said that it's not about how much you get, it's about how much you save or how much you keep, he said. And this thing called a savings rate is like religion in the financial independence community, the people who want to retire early. It is like religion because it is the number one thing that's within your control. Oftentimes, the things that aren't in your control are how much you earn from one month to the next. Like if you're a contractor or you run a business or so on and so forth. But what is within your control is how much you spend. So they try and control their savings rate as much as possible. A great resource for people, I wasn't going to mention this one, but a great resource for people in Australia is this one right here. It's not showing me anything. Let's see if it's still here. Okay, it's not going anymore by the looks of it. But this website called Dividends Down Under used to show all the different months and weeks and what they spend on. Dave also shows this on Strong Money Australia. I'll drop this link in the chat now. So Strong Money, it's coming in the chat. I've got about 5 of these to share with you tonight, by the way. Strong Money. So Dave's name will get brought up again. Dave is the author of Strong Money Australia. And he talks about this, and I'll come up with that in just a sec. But a lot of people don't focus on how much they save or how much they keep. They focus on what they earn. Like, when was the last time you went up to someone and said, hey, friend, how much do you earn? Like, what are you bringing in these days? And they might say, I'm earning $100,000. I'm earning $200,000. Fantastic. When was the last time you went up to someone and said, hey, how much are you keeping? Like, no one ever says that, but that's the only thing that really matters, isn't it? How much do you keep? Because that's the thing that matters. And so that's your savings rate. Stuart, you said part of the reason for this is that low returns on capital are taxed at a lower rate than returns on labor/effort. Stuart, thank you for saying that, and thank you for pointing that out. So Stuart was referring to this bit just here. Thanks for that, Stu. So he was saying that when you are an employee, that's a horrible color. White does not work on that. So when you are an employee, if you earn the maximum amount of money, you will be taxed at the maximum income tax rate, which is 45%, right? But if you have a business or you invest for the long term, you can actually, it's basically deferring that, because if your business is growing, or if you're an investor and you just keep the money invested, you don't necessarily pay the tax because you're just increasing your wealth. And so that's a really, really important insight. Tax is inevitable, as is death. Those are 2 things that I've learned so far. So if we go down, and I'm going to let you all in on a little secret, right? I'm actually going to take you behind the scenes in my Twitter account and behind the scenes in my Instagram account, because in anticipation for today, I was messaging some of Australia's biggest FIRE advocates or financial independence advocates. And here you can see the question that I asked Pete. This is Pete Warden. Some of you will know him. He actually happens to co-host one of our podcasts at Rask now. But what was the hardest part of getting started? And what's been the most surprising thing since you've reached financial independence? For those of you that don't know, Pete effectively retired at 33. But it wasn't always the way. Pete actually, before that was pretty good at going to the pub. And he said that to me just this afternoon. He said his answer to these questions are as follows. He said, for the hardest part of getting started, it was buckling down and saving. I was I was a big pub guy. Well, it makes sense. And I said, what was the hardest bit about that? And he said, for me, it was giving up the booze. He said, some people would find it easy, but for me, it felt impossible. But also made the biggest difference when I finally managed it. And I said, mind if I quote that, Pete? And he said, go for it. You know how I managed it? Started going to the gym at 5 p.m. on Friday instead of going to opera bar. Get through to 7 p.m. also, and you're safe. So that was Pete's solution to, like, what was the hardest bit of getting started on this journey towards financial independence. And the second question was, like, what's been the most surprising thing to you? He says, life has gone in directions I never even expected. I have lived all over the place, for example. Like, currently, Pete spends maybe not half his year, but nearly half his year in England. And he spends the other half in Noosa in Queensland. And Pete's a big property guy. He's a big property investor these days, but he does that because he wants to do it. Like, I'm so grateful that Pete co-hosts one of our podcasts at Rask, because he just wants to do it, which is amazing. So this is a kind of the thing that you'll see repeat again and again and again. Okay, so that's Pete's story. You can find Pete online at petewarden.com. There's a link in the chat there for that now. So I reached out to Money Flamingo. So if you don't know who Money Flamingo is, she's on Instagram and she has a fantastic website, and I'll share that in just a moment. And writes about financial independence, how to retire early, and how to get on that journey as soon as possible. So I said, hello, Mrs. Flamingo. I've got a random question for you. It was actually two questions. What was the hardest part of getting started? And how long did it take until you thought, wow, this is starting to work? If you can share dollars or a timeline, that would be incredible. And then she said this. She said, realizing that it's not all or nothing and that financial independence can be achieved eventually. I'll make this even bigger. Even if you don't start in your early 20s with a high paying job and are not willing to go full throttle for 10 plus years. It took me 4 years of watching on the sidelines to realize this. 4 years. This is a very common theme. A lot of these people knew what they had to do and they knew that they needed to invest, but they took years to do it. So if you're one of those people, that's okay. And hey, CP, I just saw your Morgan Fireman comment. That's a great one. Rate it very highly. Well done. So the second part of my question was, it wasn't actually her being jealous about me giving away a flamingo T-shirt, but maybe she gets one in the future. It was, how long did you take until you thought, wow, this is starting to work? And she said, about 2 years after we got serious about investing. At that point, we were maybe around 20% of the way to financial independence. The systems we put in place worked. We were building wealth without depriving ourselves, and the dollar started to compound. At that point, I realized it was all just math and a matter of time. And this is a fantastic thing. So why don't we just use this as a jumping off point? I'll share Money Flamingo's website for those of you that want to bookmark it, which I highly, highly encourage you to do. Let's go to the Money Smart compound interest calculator. So hopefully Money Flamingo is not watching this because I might do a strategy. Let's say we start with $0 today and we're going to put in $2,500 a month. Sounds pretty big, but okay, let's give it a crack. We deposit that every month and we are getting our returns annually, and we plan to invest for at least 20 years. Now let's assume the return that we get from our stock portfolio is 7%. These are all just hypothetical assumptions. After this period of time, we would have made regular deposits of $600,000. So that's the key point. $600,000 is what you put in. What you get back is $629,000, not including tax, of course. But what you get back is almost double. So you double your return. So meaning that the longer you invest, the more the market does the heavy lifting. So let's go back up a few slides. If you are here, when you start, so a lot of people go like this. I'll show you their journey. Orange, that'll work. So they start here, they go down to here, maybe even as a side hustle or full-time. Then they probably don't go that way. They probably go here. And if they're really game, they would go from here to here. Some people, this is optional, I would say, for some people because it's so risky. But they start here, they move down to here with a side hustle or some extra income, and then they move across into these two categories. A lot of people do also go straight from here to here and don't become self-employed, and that's fine too. But let's say, for example, so Money Flamingo said to us that she took 4 years of watching before giving it a crack. Let's take this same scenario, right? And let's delay it by 4 years. And we will keep an annual compounding frequency. So same amount invested, same everything, except we've delayed 4 years. Let's have a look what this does to us. Okay. It's still $2,500. So delay 4 years. Now we see that this person at the end of the period, instead of having 1.2 million, has 836,000, meaning they have significantly less than the person who just started, the same person that started 4 years early. So what is the effect of inflation over that time period? That must reduce the real gains by quite a lot. It would, Roger. That's a good point. So taxes and inflation would destroy this return. But there's another question right before it, which is from Paul, who says, why does it always set at 7%? Now, I just set it at that because of this reason. I'll be really quick, Paul. Just a reminder while I'm doing this that any of the questions that I answer in these Selfwealth lives are strictly limited to general financial information only, because I don't know your personal circumstances. And that's particularly important about what I'm going to share right now. When I quote a return or I make any type of assumption, it's really important to understand that the future is unknown. It's very easy for us to look back in time and go, well, that was great, we could have done this. But that doesn't mean the future will be the same. Okay, so let's take returns from Australian shares and international shares and US shares for, say, I don't know, what's that, 50 years? So you can see the returns from Australian shares here at 9.5%. You can see international shares at 9.9 and US shares at 11.7. Now, to the question, and always consult the PDS. That's good. Thanks, Rob. If we do talk about ETFs and these types of things, we'll say that. But let's narrow it down. Let's just say from the year 2000, right? That's December 1999. That's close enough. So here we can see the returns from Australian shares are lower. 8.2%, 5% for international, 6.7 US, Aussie property 6.6, and international property. Some of you may know that this was the top of the DOM boom, so then it crashed after this. So it's probably not the right point to do it from. But my point is this: if we look at all of the returns over the long term, and I'll put this link in the chat so everyone can see it. If we look at this chart over the long term, what it actually shows you is that no matter what, even in the worst types of period, over the long term, shares are pretty good. You know, not always, they're really volatile, but they're pretty good. And they should outpace inflation. That's the big reason that people do it, because inflation should be broadly in line with the cash return that you get from like a savings account or something like that. And that's why people who just are employees and never bother to pay down their mortgage faster or never bother to invest really struggle to retire early. Like it's obvious when you look at this. If you don't invest and you just keep your money in a bank account or whatever, you're not going to be able to retire early. Well, you might be if you have like a humongous wage, but you're going to pay heaps of tax. So you may as well just start investing at least some of it. Now, some people would come in here and go all guns blazing and say, maybe we get 10% or maybe we get 15, or maybe we do what Warren Buffett did and we do 21% for forever. And maybe you do that and you end up with a lot of money. But the easier way to make a return for your retirement, rather than try and take too much risk, is just to extend the time that you plan to retire and also extend the amount that you invest. And this is your savings rate. Remember, this is your savings rate. And here we can see, it makes a huge difference. Even if we don't extend this out, it makes a huge difference. So the regular deposit is the thing that most people get wrong. Is they don't focus on this, they focus on the returns. They try and get bigger and better returns. Get rich quick. This is the thing that matters, particularly in the early years. Okay, back to the returns. Okay, but back to the chats. So don't worry, Money Flamingo, you will get a shirt. Speaking of the guy that got the shirt, that was this guy, Aussie Firebug. I gave him a t-shirt just like the one I'm wearing now. So I asked the same questions to him that I asked uh, to Pete. I said, "What's the hardest part of getting started? What was it? And what's been the most surprising?" And you can go onto the Aussie Firebug website and you can see what he's invested in, how he does it, how he spends money, all of this stuff. I'll put it in the chat. Aussie Firebug, brilliant blogger and podcaster, by the way. Brilliant, 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 brilliant. You can see all that. I think I've referenced him on the show before. So you can see exactly all the things that go into the portfolio. Anyway, so I said those two questions, and he said analysis paralysis. Geez, that sounds familiar. So it sounds like the same thing that Money Flamingo said. I just sat on the sidelines for ages. Okay, let's go on. So analysis paralysis. Thinking I needed the perfect portfolio, which doesn't exist. I researched ETFs on and off for a year. For a whole year, he spent researching ETFs. Wow. Now that's interesting because we talk about ETFs each and every week on the Selfwealth Live. So if only Selfwealth Live was around back then. So Joe, how can I reduce taxes on an ETF? I've generalized your question. So it's not possible exactly for someone. Joe, can you stick around to the end of the show? Because I will answer that, because I got a lot of questions about this recently and I haven't spoken about it on Selfwealth Live. Can you just remind me towards 6 o'clock? Okay. So he said analysis paralysis. We all get that. There are 2,000 stocks on the exchange. So we think, well, there's so many stocks to buy. Which one do I buy? Well, there's so many ETFs. There's 300 of them. Which one do I buy? Fair enough. It's like, how many versions of baked beans do we need? If there was 300 or 2,000 different versions of baked beans, I mean, Heinz would probably be struggling. Anyway, so number 2, what's been the most surprising thing since you've reached FIRE? And he goes, I haven't reached FIRE yet. I'd say my wife and I, are semi-retired. It's surprising how much socializing came from our regular jobs. And now we have to be careful not to turn into hermit crabs. I'm a people person, so going out and hanging with folks was always essential for me. I never really thought about how work naturally took care of that. But now, in this new phase, we make an effort to meet people and stay connected. It's so true. He does a really good job of forcing himself out to do that. He blogs, he does the podcast. Those are just some little things. But one thing he also talks about, and this is something that I'm going to bring up again in a moment, is he also talks about this thing. He always talks about something called meaningful work. So he says, you should live your life and do meaningful work. Meaningful work. A lot of us just do work that gives us the biggest salary. But what does meaningful work actually mean? So he said it means work you do without being paid. And I think that's a really good test of if you would do the job even if you weren't getting money. Something that brings satisfaction other than earning more money. And that's some of the flexibility to Sparky's point earlier on about optional retirement. Who says you have to retire? Just because you've got $1 million in the bank doesn't mean you need to do it. Is FIRE more of a pipe dream for people who aren't earning in the top 10% since houses are so expensive, says Space Monkey Mojo. I find it hard to believe people can have FIRE and own their principal place of residence before 60, especially in Sydney or Melbourne. Absolutely, Space Monkey Mojo. So it is a pipe dream for some people and it's not for others. I can tell you from speaking with people, Space Monkey Mojo, that, and seeing people up close, by the way, is that the biggest thing that holds people back from achieving financial independence is the very thought process of it being unachievable. Because a lot of people kind of write it off before they've even got started. And then the second thing that I would say is most people don't achieve financial independence because they haven't done this. The very first slide from tonight's show. They don't actually know what makes them happy. So what do? They end up spending money on useless shit, to be honest. Excuse my French. I did take classes in my teenage years. And they end up spending money on things that are just horrible. Like expensive cars, material items, thinking that would bring them happiness. But it doesn't. And in fact, it takes them completely back the other direction. And so, yes, it is hard, but a lot of the people that you will see that I've quoted tonight have found a way around that, but all of them have something in common, actually. And it's a credit to you for saying this, Space Monkey Mojo, is that a lot of them found a way to solve their housing situation. So a lot of them don't live in inner Sydney or inner Melbourne for that very reason. So I agree that it is incredibly difficult, but they did make sacrifices. But the thing I'd say is don't write it off because of that. It's just not worth writing off because of that. So I can see some people agree and some people disagree. That's good. So, okay, we've got 2 more of these to go, and then we'll dive into some of those other questions. So I asked Dave Gow, he's a good friend of mine. I said, Dave, what do you think? What do you think about those 2 questions? What was the hardest part of getting started, and what was surprising to you? And he said, hey, mate, of course. He said, the hardest part was accepting it was probably going to take a long time and dealing with what seemed like small amounts in the beginning. I dreamed of having a huge portfolio of investments, but had to accept it took time and a lot of small amounts to get there. But I actually found it motivating to find new ways to save because I knew that meant more money to invest and reach my goals sooner. That is so interesting that he would say that, because I was actually personally myself, I was addicted to saving for a very long time. So I was very much like, it was like the one thing that I was like, I must save and I must invest. It's a kind of a weird thing. But I definitely made huge sacrifices because of that in my early 20s, and made huge sacrifices to start the business that I started. So we all go about it differently, but that is definitely something that I've come up with. But Dave actually does share his budget. I don't know where it is right now. He shares his budget line by line, so you can see exactly. I don't know where it is. It'll be in here somewhere. But he actually shares his budget line by line by line, and he actually just wrote a book, which is I think it's a bestseller for a self-published book. Good on him, Dave. Good on you, Dave. So go and check that out and have a look at his book. We're actually giving some away soon, so stay tuned for that too. Okay, so okay. What are the poll results, Rob? What are the poll results? Show me these poll results. We're going to look into the zeitgeist now. So the poll results are: have you hit subscribe? 84% said yes, but 10% said they're doing it right now. Well, that's good news. That's pretty good, Rob. Mixed feelings, like you said. Okay, so number 2. Remember my question for number 2 was, what was the thing that surprised you the most, Dave? And he said, the most surprising thing is easy to answer. I had no idea how much energy I would have after leaving my job. He said, after a few months of true relaxation and unwinding, I felt so refreshed and had all this positive energy that I wanted to do something new with. For some reason, I just never even considered that before. We give up so much of our physical and mental energy to work that we're always tired and can't imagine being truly energetic again. But it does happen, and you'll need new enjoyable places to put that energy, whether it's different work, hobbies, health, volunteering, family, etc. I actually said to Dave, Dave, would you mind coming to one of our events in Melbourne? This was last year. And he said, oh, sorry, mate, I think he said something along the lines of, that's when the turtles are coming in, because he takes care of turtles, like the baby turtles over in Perth. And I was like, you're retired. I get it. That's cool. You go and do that. I'm going to go down to this event. And that was just a really cool moment, because I thought, oh, well, it's live in action. And there he is saying it again. And I did miss those 2 things. What did you say? No, because I don't like Rob, and no, I won't because I don't like Owen. Oh, that's pretty nice. Thanks, guys. Rob, tough crowd. Very tough crowd. Okay, final one. This is from Captain Fi. So you can find Captain Fi at captainfi.com. And this is a very interesting one for me, because Captain Fi obviously is a pilot, so you can see the hat. Captain Fi actually went about fire probably a little bit different to the others, in that he's also very, well, they're all entrepreneurial, but he was, I would say, very entrepreneurial in terms of how he goes about it, trying to find kind of innovative ways to make money. They all do their own side hustling and they all make money running their own thing, running their own race. But he goes on, and I will maybe, instead of read it all out, you can just pause after the video's done and you can read it all. But basically, he goes on to say analysis paralysis, which is the same thing Money Flamingo said, and the same thing Aussie Firebug said. The hardest thing about getting started is analysis paralysis. There are literally so many different investing options available, including a lot of advanced / dodgy options like options trading, which you shouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. It can be hard to know which way to go, and goes on to talk about that. And finally, concludes with, the media makes getting started so much harder due to fear mongering. He made a great analogy about when you go shopping for food. If you just avoid all the stuff in the middle of the shop, you should be fine, because that's where all the sugar is. But he actually talked about something, is that, and he's talked about this quite a bit, is that a lot of people forget that there's another path to financial independence, and to retire early, which is to actually start your own little business, whatever that business might be. It's actually a really good way to consider getting ahead early. And a lot of people would say, it's too hard, I can't do it, I don't want the stress. That's okay, but you're just not going to be able to create wealth that way. I said on the other side, I said, well, what's been surprising to you? And he said, the existential crisis that occurs when you no longer realize you are controlled by money, or rather that money doesn't dictate your life anymore. You really are free to do anything. This made me uncomfortable, because for a long time, my ego and identity revolved around, firstly, being a pilot, and secondly, being somewhat good with money and feverishly saving and investing towards this goal of fire, which all of a sudden is reached, and the identities come toppling over, and it's rather uncomfortable. You are forced to introspect and work out, what do I actually want to get out of life, because you don't have any more excuses. On the second note, the next surprising thing is the number of people who ask for / demand your time when they find out you're not working or taking a break. It's been very important to set boundaries and get good at saying no and turning down opportunities. Initially, I just filled the void with activities, other forms of work, hobbies, helping others, so as to avoid that uncomfortable existential crisis. But going forward, I am getting better at saying no and focusing on living a truer life to myself. This is like they're dropping some bombs on us tonight, some real heavy thought bombs. But this exercise can be done by anyone at any time, no matter how much money you have, no matter how far away from retirement you might be, no matter how much time you have left. And so a really important lesson to remember there. Okay, so now we can get through to some of these questions. So my current fear is trying to set up for tax efficiency. Well, tax efficiency, we'll talk about that in just a minute, because there was that other question. Caroline says she loves Captain Fi. Paul, you've said, my current fear is that I'm too old to implement the things I'm learning effectively. I would, Paul, a question that we get a lot at Rask is like, I'm 40 years old and I'm just getting out of credit card debt. Very, very, very common. I'm 50 years old and I don't own a home. Very, 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 very common. And what I've found is that a lot of people they're worried about that. They're worried about that factor, right? And I've talked to people in their 60s who say, oh, I wish I studied and I wish I did this job so I earned a bit more, or something like that. And all we can really do to remedy that is to say that there's still time to do it. And I know you might be thinking, well, this is coming from a guy in a sloth Christmas shirt with candy canes, but there is still time. And I've come across many people. There was one person who wrote into the podcast probably about a year ago who started their financial independence journey at 50 and did actually retire early. So there are people out there who do this. And remember, there are 3 things basically that you can work towards. Number 1 is the amount of time that you have to invest. Number 2 is the amount of savings that you keep, so the amount of money that you keep. And number 3 are the returns that you achieve. So if you think about that time, the dollar cost averaging, the amount that you put in every month, and then the return that you achieve. The return that you achieve is not fully within your control. However, remember that many people, even when they hit retirement age of 60 to 70, the life expectancy is still 15 or 20 years. So it's still a long time. But what our default decision is at that moment is to move straight to the defensive things, the things that don't return that much. But that doesn't have to be the case, because someone who is more knowledgeable, all else being equal, I believe, someone who is knowledgeable can afford to take more risk because they actually understand that if the market falls 20%, you know what? Well, history's on my side. It's probably going to come back. Might not be today, might not be tomorrow, but I can afford to take a little bit more risk. And that means you can afford to get a little bit more return. I'm not saying you, but just generally speaking. Linda, you've said, I discovered Mr. Money Mustache a few years ago. His newsletters are fascinating with his tips and all of that. Yes, they are indeed. So Mr. Money Mustache, one of my favorite lines from Mr. Money Mustache, who is the original advocate for this movement, he has this line that only suckers believe the restaurant is a source of food. And what he's saying there is he basically says that he's basically saying that people who think that they need to go to a restaurant because that's where the food is, they're wrong. The only reason you pay to go to a restaurant is for the entertainment. And I just think that's a great line because it reminds us what we're actually paying for. It's not the sustenance, it's the entertainment and the experience. So Nyanda, you said that line of compound interest, those who understand it and earn it, and those who don't understand it and pay it. Yeah, so true, so true. Okay, so a few questions here that we can finish up with. Number one was from, I'm just going to go back to it because you summarized it for me very kindly. Where is it? It was about tax. Pretty sure it was about tax. Okay, I've lost it. I've lost the tax question. Whoever asked the tax question, please bring it back to the front of mind. I can't remember where it was because I will have a look at that. Okay, I think the question was, how do I pay less tax with my ETFs? Okay, so, and Jason said something similar about tax efficiency. Okay, so you can't control how much tax is incurred in an ETF. Like you can't get out your phone and write an email to the ETF provider. Dear Vanguard, can I pay less tax? That's not how it works, unfortunately. They might receive your email, might read it, but they'll probably say, we can't do that. But you can be careful with the, oh, it's Joe. Thank you, Joe. You can be careful with the ETFs that you select. So let me explain. Many of you will know this, and I'll share my screen again. Many of you will know that the in an ETF, you pay tax every year, basically. So what happened is, let's say there are companies inside an ETF. So these are like shares, like you've got like CBA here. This is a C and that's an A. So that's CBA. You've got BHP and you've got Telstra inside your ETF, right? TLS. If you own those shares directly, you would only pay tax when you sell or when you receive a dividend. But by holding them in a basket, otherwise known as an ETF, when the shares are inside this basket, the basket, being the ETF, is actually required to send any of the tax back to you immediately, basically, like every financial year. So you, as the individual investor, pay tax because the ETF is what we call a pass-through entity. And now let me explain what this means. So, for example, here, if your ETF owns these shares, every time the ETF manager, like Vanguard, so this could be Vanguard, every time the ETF manager buys or sells a different position, a taxable amount will be incurred, right? Like, for example, if you sell BHP shares for a $10 profit, well, it's a $10 taxable gain. It doesn't matter if it's inside an ETF or not, it's still a taxable gain. So all of that $10, assuming you were the only person that owned the ETF, you would be liable for $10 of tax, right? Because you're the only one that owns this ETF, and this ETF owns all of these shares, and you just made a $10 profit. So that's why we call it a pass-through entity, right? This is different to, say, like a listed investment company, which is a different thing altogether, because that doesn't have to pass the tax back to you. it can just incur the tax inside of the thing. So how do you know? Here's the question that you need to ask. How do you know which ETF is going to do more buying and selling? Because the buying and selling causes the tax. If they never sold BHP or they never sold CBA or they never sold Telstra, well, there's no tax for capital gains because they weren't sold. They're still in there. So some ETF providers, Vanguard does this, VAS ETF. What am I doing? I had to stop, think, and check myself. So if we go here, so CP, you said, Owen, if you could answer tax efficiency in general for share investing, if you're in a job as your investment income, will that be taxed at a marginal rate? Yes. I'll explain that in a sec. Okay, so if you go to the Vanguard website for its ETF, for the VAS ETF, and where is the number that I'm looking for, Vanguard? Portfolio data, I think it is. Okay. So it's no longer here. Where are we? Let me just try and find this, guys. They used to have it on their old one. And now I cannot see it anywhere. Okay, I cannot see it. But some of these used to have it. So it doesn't have it right now. I'm surprised it doesn't have it. Okay, anyway, I'll explain it without using an example. Some of the ETF providers, it will be on their website somewhere. So what the ETF providers will publish is they'll publish a number, right? So they'll publish a number that's like, say, this number. They'll go like 20%. Now, this is called a turnover. So when an ETF buys or sells an investment, that's turning over the portfolio. It's like you're turning over rocks, right? Like I've sold one, I've bought another one. I've sold one, I've bought another one. I've sold one. That's called turnover, and it's measured as a percentage. So if the percentage was 20%, it would mean that 20% of the stocks or the value of those stocks inside the portfolio was sold that year. There was 20%. And you can imagine that if there's a higher number of higher amount of turnover, you're going to get more tax because there's more rocks turning over, which every time it turns over, it causes tax. It's either a taxable gain or it's a loss. There's tax, right? Now, some ETFs will publish on their website their turnover rate. So the turnover rate for the Vanguard ETF that I brought up just before is extremely low. This one right here is extremely low. It's less than 5%, right? It's less than 5%. But some ETFs have turnover rates that would be over 100%, meaning that they're buying and selling the portfolio on average at least once a year. The entire portfolio is bought and sold, right? So you want to find ETFs that have a lower turnover rate. This isn't something that's talked about a lot, but it's only when people down here, the little fella down the end here, he goes, hold on a second, I'm paying tax. I'm paying a lot of tax. Why? It's because the ETF is buying and selling a lot of stuff. And he or she should have chosen the ETF that has lower turnover. And typically, these are also the low-cost ETFs and the diversified ones. Now, that's a bit technical based on what we were just saying, but that's how it is calculated, and you can actually find them. I'll see if this other chart fund compare. Let's be real quick with this one, guys, because I know this might bore some people, but I'll just quickly show you. I'll see if it's here. So Vanguard has this free tool, and I'm not going to share it with you straight away because last time I did this, the website crashed because we all went on it and we all tried to use it at the same time. So I'm going to try and find the Vanguard Australian Shares Index ETF, this one right here, and I'm going to try and use this, not that one. Let's go with, say, IVV, this ETF. Okay. So these ETFs do very different things, but I think, yeah, so here we go. This ETF here, zoom in. This ETF here invests in Australian shares, and this one invests in United States shares. And here we can see that the turnover rate is mentioned. So you see that right here? And you can see that that was last commented it was last calculated many years ago, but both ETFs have really low turnover rates. Get out of the way, data. Okay, I don't know what's going on with that thing, but they've got very low turnover rates. Some ETFs are 20%. Some managed funds are 100%, 200%. You want to target funds with a low turnover rate. It's a bit technical, but yeah. Okay. So there was another question in here. Benny, you've asked, can I claim the ETF fee on tax? Benny, speak to your accountant, but I'm pretty sure it's not how it works, mate. I'm pretty sure it's adjusted off the capital value. So go and check that out. Because remember, when you see an ETF, that one, when you see an ETF's share price, it's automatically got the fee taken out because the ETF provider takes it out every day. So Joe, you've said, what about ETF dividend tax? So that's, yeah. So just one final warning, Joe, you're asking all the good questions. I have answered a couple of them previously, but let's say we've got good one might be the Global X FANG ETF. Okay, so this ETF just invests in US shares and it invests in like the top 10. I think it might have some Asian shares, or it used to. Now, this one, when you go to the website, a lot of people get confused by this, right? When you go to the website and you go to the dividends section, where are your dividends at? FANG? Show me the FANG dividends. Okay, I can't. Here we go. So it doesn't have it yet, but this will soon show the 12-month yield. So this will show what people think is a dividend. It's not a dividend. People get confused because they think it's like a Telstra paying a dividend. It's not. This figure can be really high because an ETF, I don't want to bore us all too much, but an ETF, whenever it makes a capital gain, it has to pass back some of those gains, meaning that it has to take some of the value out of the ETF and pass it back to you. So, for example, if you receive $10 from an ETF, you should check the statement that you get at the end of the year, because there's a chance that some of that $10 is not actually a dividend. It's just like say it's like $3. It's not actually a dividend that you're receiving. It's just some of the value that was inside the ETF being passed back to you, and the ETF would have fallen. So you might want to reinvest that. Now, how does that work? You'll get a tax statement at the end of the year. The big ETF providers like Vanguard, Global X, iShares, Spider, BetaShares, and VanEck, they'll all start to send you a tax form that you can give to your accountant, and they come in about the next month or so, and you can take that with you. And there was one other question I wanted to. So Ben, you've said, based on the ETF turnover rate, are you paying tax based on the value of your shares? Yes, you are. So you're paying proportionally, Ben, but you don't have any control over what shares are bought and sold. So fortune of the day, you've asked the question, so does the ETF management company pay the tax? No. So the ETF provider, so in this case, Vanguard, right? It doesn't own your shares. It just holds them for you. So Vanguard manages the ETF, which holds your shares, and then you are the owner of those shares, including the dividends. So it doesn't pay tax for you. You get the statement at the end of the year to tell you how much of the tax is yours. And this is why some people don't like ETFs, because they can't control the tax, whereas with shares, they can do it. So that's maybe, I'm glad you enjoyed that explanation, Tamara. Thank you. So yeah, that's the answer to that question. Okay, I've got time for one more question. Damitrix 2, you said, isn't it hedged when the AUD is high and unhedged if it's low? Oh, you're responding to someone else, right? Okay. So yes, so that's a good one. So sorry, Peter, I should have mentioned that. This is the key thing to understand. Sorry, Peter, I should have mentioned this. So an ETF, like all of the ETFs that I've mentioned, they'll send you, like, it's not a tax bill, but basically what happens is the tax year ends on June 30th, right? So at the end of the year, there will be a taxable amount buried inside the ETF, like over here. And then basically those people who own the the ETF at the end of the year may be in for a bit of a shock. So that's something to keep in mind, is that at the end of the financial year is when that reconciliation happens. And you might actually find, let's see if they show it. You might actually find that at the end of the financial year, so June 30th, sometimes ETFs will fall just because it's the end of the financial year. And that's to show that investors are likely to be sent some of their return as capital, not as dividends. It's a bit technical, but if you ever wake up one day and you jump onto Reddit, like people did during the COVID crisis, they were stuck at home and they jumped onto Reddit and they were the first time investors and they go, "Oh, my ETF is down 10% today and I don't know why." All you've got to do is check the date. If it's July 1st, it's probably because it's the end of the tax year. Good explanation to follow up, Peter. Thank you. The pooling causes some unit holders' capital gains to turn into other unit holders' income. Really good. So thank you. Okay, so CP, Owen, if you could address tax efficiency for stock investors if one is in a job so that investment earnings are not taxed at their marginal rate. Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, so let's just I'll be really quick, but you should speak to your accountant about all of this, obviously. I've got to say that. So really quickly, let's say you are an individual and you're earning, I don't know, $100,000, right? The way it works is that if you have investments over here and say you've got your share portfolio and that share portfolio pays some dividends, so we're not talking about ETFs, but just pays dividends, and you receive those dividends back to you, right? That income that you receive, so the income that you receive from your investments is added to your income it's called your assessable income. It's added on top, right? So just like anything else, it's added, like it's like extra income, it's added here. But the thing to keep in mind is the thing that's not added to your tax that year is, let's say you buy an investment for $10. That's a dollar sign and that's a 10. So you buy it for $10 today, and then at the end of the first year it is 12. And then at the end of the second year, it is 13. And then at the end of the year after that, it's say 17, like it's jumped right up, right? If you haven't sold this entire time, you don't have tax to declare because you haven't sold it yet. It's only when you sell it and you realize the gain that then you pay the tax. And then it gets added on top of your income for that year, right? But the key thing to note is that there is a benefit for being a long-term investor. And this is where I'll tell you to go and speak to your accountant or check out the ATO website. There is a benefit for some individual investors and self-managed super funds and superannuation funds. If you invest for the long term, being more than a year, there is a discount that applies. So in this case, we've gone from $10 to 17. That's a capital gain of $7. Now, if this was an eligible investor, that's cut in half. And so they only pay tax on $3.50. So in this case, it's only the $3.50 that's added, not the full $7. So this is to the comment earlier on from Stuart about people that grow wealthy. It's because the value of the thing that they own over here increases in value and they don't incur tax immediately. They will pay some tax, but that's how it works. So, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so thank you everyone for taking some time to ask technical questions at the end of the show on fire. The first bit was very philosophical. Apologies if it was a bit off kilter, but there was actually something that I did want to mention. Oh yeah, so tonight we're doing financial independence, retire early. Next week, I'm going to show you where I'd invest my $5,000 tax return. I'm not getting a tax return, so don't get ahead of ourselves. I'm actually paying tax this year, which is very sad. But hey, that's what it is. It is what it is. And that's the rules that we live in. What a country. So next week at 6 p.m. on Wednesday night, I'll be sharing with you how I'll be investing my tax return if I had one, but I'll be just investing anyway. So I'll show you how I'm going to invest in July. I'll be recording from Perth, actually, other side of the country next week, but I'll still be here at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll be diving into that. And then in August, guess what? We've got beta shares coming on the show. So we have the whole, no, not the whole team, but a lot of the beta shares team, they'll be joining us in August on Selfwealth Live to talk about all things ETFs, building a portfolio, how tax works, how to build a satellite portfolio, how to pick and choose, you name it. You got to be there or you got to be square, as they used to say. Okay, the quote for this evening to send us off into the distance is this one from Brian Feroldi, at Brian Feroldi on Twitter. One of the best follows on Twitter if you are interested in finance and investing. So here's Brian. If everyone put 15% of their salary into index funds, lived on the remaining 85%, avoided all non-mortgage debt, the number of millionaires would 10x. He's probably right. If everyone just saved regularly and avoided some of the mistakes that come with debt, they'd probably be okay. And there'd be a lot more millionaires walking around the streets. See you next week. That's what I'm going to end with. Thanks, Stu. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. And that's not on Twitter. That's on X, as Martin says. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. So, yeah, Elon Musk's project. So, see you in Perth, says Ben. See you then, mate. Looking forward to it. So, thank you, everyone. And sorry we went over time. Sorry we started late. Sorry, Rob, we ended late. But I will see you all next week on behalf of Rob and the team at Selfwealth and myself, Owen from Rask. Thank you, everyone. And don't forget, you're probably pretty close to living your rich life you don't even realize. If you take the time to do that exercise, you'll find life's pretty good. So just enjoy it. Take every day as it comes. And the rest is history, as they say.